Welcome to the Mindful Healers Podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to the Mindful Healers Podcast. Today's episode is going to be an explanation of gentle, slow, and restorative yoga, all of which are powerful medicine for stress relief and healing. Restorative yin, gentle, slow yoga are some of the most effective and underutilized stress reduction and health promotion techniques. And yet most people don't even know what they are. What I will share today is, as usual, not medical advice. So this podcast was inspired by the many clients that I meet at retreats who don't even know that there are so many different kinds of yoga. And they mentioned to me after the retreats that they just had no idea all of what yoga was and what it could be and how it can be helpful to you in healing, recovery, and rejuvenation. So the intention of today's podcast is to explain yoga beyond hot yoga, vinyasa, sun salutations, and flow yoga, and specifically to share the various types of restorative yoga, slow yoga, gentle yoga, adaptive yoga, and why we practice these. I hope that you will discover that gentle, slow yoga is powerful medicine, and understand that it's designed to cultivate nervous system relaxation, meaning it activates the parasympathetic nervous system and decreases your stress. It's also what we call conscious rest. The brain waves are different than sleep, but this conscious rest is one of the most productive activities you can do for your peace, health, and healing. The takeaways of this episode are that yoga, in air quotes, can be accessible and helpful for every body, 2 words and 1 word. So Hippocrates once said that healing is a matter of time, but it is also sometimes a matter of opportunity. And restorative yoga is a very much underutilized opportunity for healing, for intentional, purposeful, kind, loving, and compassionate healing of both your body and your mind, and also your spirit. So this podcast is going to be a solo cast today. And to begin, I also wanted to share the idea that to understand what really ails you, you have to be quiet and listen. And the point of slow yoga, gentle yoga, and restorative yoga is exactly that, to become quiet and still enough to listen to what really ails you. And sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's mental and emotional, sometimes it's spiritual, and sometimes it's a combination of all of the above. My hope in sharing these concepts with you is that many of you will learn how to bring these practices into your life, and that perhaps you'll even begin on your own. It's also an encouragement to join me for an in-person retreat, in particular the Nourish and Transform Retreat at Sagrada, which is where we practice this type of yoga daily for 5 days. And people learn all of the different ways of doing it and all of the different ways to enjoy it more deliciously and effectively. We also work to make it simple and to personalize these practices. Many people think that you have to do an entire class to get benefit, and many of these practices are incredibly impactful, 1 pose at a time or 5 minutes at a time. The usual yoga that I teach is not restorative, slow, gentle, yin, or adaptive yoga. It's a blend of yin and hatha. Hatha yoga is where you hold poses longer and you don't flow through sun salutations. So it's a slower practice but not as slow as traditional restorative and yin practices. The yoga I teach, usually on Zoom and what I call mindful yoga, is a very different kind of yoga, though, than you will find in a yoga class. And it is specifically tailored for people who are high achievers and overworked, exhausted, and potentially burnt out. People who need to grow self-compassion and kindness towards their own body. So I always infuse mindfulness into my classes. I also infuse coaching and mindset work. This is on purpose because when we are relaxed in yoga, we are much more able to consider seeing things from a different perspective. I also infuse breathing practices into my yoga, knowing that breathing changes your physiology and also changes your receptivity to perspective shifting. The other thing that I like to share about my usual mindful yoga, which many people don't realize, is that I aim to make it accessible to all different levels of yoga, different body types, and even those with chronic conditions and even potentially ADHD. I get a lot of feedback from people that who've had a hard time practicing yoga in the past, that the kind of yoga that I teach is the first time they have enjoyed yoga and or felt safe or welcome practicing. This is especially true of people at retreats who say this, and people who maybe aren't flexible or who came without any yoga practice at all. And I will offer that many people come to my retreats as beginner yogis or someone who practiced years ago but don't have an ongoing yoga practice. And they still come to Sagrada and they learn things about yoga that they love and they can carry forth into the rest of their lives. And usually after joining me for a retreat, they continue to practice with me online on Zoom on most Saturdays and or do recorded classes on YouTube. So we know that yoga in general has lots of health benefits. There's actually tons of studies over the years, evidence-based studies. There's many, many studies that are done outside the US about the effectiveness of yoga in impacting blood pressure, joint mobility, quality of life, reduced stress. There's lots of studies about yoga and cancer recurrence and cancer morbidity and mortality. There's lots of studies about yoga and different chronic diseases and surgical healing. And the yoga that is often brought to people with chronic illnesses and or high emotional stress is this restorative yin, gentle, adaptive practices. And so I like to always point out that yoga is especially beneficial when you are not at your best. And as many of you who've practiced with me over this summer when I was recovering from surgery, there are many recorded classes on YouTube where you can practice when you are not at your best and figure out what you can do and figure out how to adapt for your body in that moment. Making sure that you understand that you can do yoga anytime, anywhere, for any amount of time and still get benefit. And also making sure that you all understand that yoga is much more than exercise. It's also much more than relaxation. And it's much more than stress reduction. It's much more than stretching. It's much more than flexibility. I like to see yoga as a philosophy or a way of living. It's also a way of working with your body and caring for your body with kindness. And so many of you may recall the podcast that I did on every body needs a friend. And yoga is actually a friend for everybody. It's a tool to befriend your body and care for it with kindness, compassion, and well. And in yoga, we always set an intention. And as we talk about in this podcast, the intention is an aspiration or a wish, types of feelings that you would like to generate. And when we set an intention, we set our mind to look at something specific, to move towards something specific. When our mind doesn't have something specific to move towards, we actually often go to the negative. And so when I set an intention in yoga, I like to think of an aspiration or a wish or how I might like to feel. And those of you who join me for my weekend Zoom classes and or on YouTube will know that most of my classes have a theme, and I set an intention, which I want you to adapt for your own practice. I use actually many tools around setting intentions in yoga at my retreats, which you'll have to come to enjoy. And I found it a really powerful way to get to know yourself and know your mind and know where your growth areas are, once again, from a place of grace and kindness. But one of my intentions with every class I teach in yoga, and really an intention of yoga, is for each of us to learn to live with the body that we have, to learn to use it optimally, befriend it, and treat it well. So yoga in this capacity is very much a healing practice and a growth strengthening practice. So I like to think of yoga as beginning where you're comfortable, practicing what feels good to your body, not only while you are practicing, but also afterwards. And so many people push themselves too hard during yoga or see it as something to accomplish. And being clear that you want to feel good in your body while you are doing it and afterwards. Now, you may feel some discomfort as you're trying different poses or you're slowing down and relaxing when you may or may not be used to this. That is fully expected, but you want to still feel good afterwards. The other point I wanted to bring up early on is that you can get benefit even with just a few minutes of practice. So many people say that, I can't do the whole class, and so I can't join. Or I get lots of requests for doing shorter practices on YouTube, half-an-hour classes, 20-minute classes. And while I do have an intention to do some of these going forward, you can also just turn off a class. You can pick the part of the class that works for you and do that. If you need the beginning meditation, you can focus on that. If you need the warm-up and the stretching, you can focus on that. If you want to work on standing poses, you can do that part. You can do the Shavasana. And so choosing the parts of the class that work for you, part of the invitation of yoga is to learn what works for you specifically. So I want to move on from the more general concepts of yoga to talk a bit about these slower, gentle yoga practices. They are even more slow than the hatha style of yoga that I usually teach. And the invitation of these practices is really to neutralize the sympathetic overdrive that most of us spend most of our lives in as a society and especially as physicians. So the gentle, slow yoga is, in essence, an essential tool for health and stress management. These practices are also very prop heavy. And props are not crutches. They're actually part of the experience, and they are purposefully part of the experience to allow you to rest comfortably and relax into poses. They are designed to support and hold your body so you can rest. Now, the props are also one of the reasons that retreats and in-person yoga are so valuable, because you can learn which props you like by trying out the ones that they have and figuring out which setups work for you with the props, including the blocks and the straps and the bolsters and different firmnesses of those tools, so that you can set yourself up at home and be able to carry forth these practices and gain benefit daily. I actually had someone who came to Connect in Nature in 2022, and she told me that after leaving the retreat, she bought herself the props and she practiced 3 poses every single night for a year until she returned to the 2023 Connect in Nature retreat. And her children had begun joining her for this pre-bed practice. And so really, when you learn these tools, they can become an integral part of your stress management, health, and sleep hygiene routine as well. And I will say that almost everyone who comes to my in-person retreats goes home with a love of restorative and yin yoga. And many of them didn't even know these types of practices existed before they came. So as we talk about the different types of slow and or what I like to refer to as nervous system yoga, there is yin yoga, which you've heard me mention. There's restorative yoga. There's gentle yoga. There's healing yoga, and there's adaptive yoga. And a lot of people use these names somewhat interchangeably, and I don't actually abide by the strict definitions. My usual classes are a blend of hatha and yin. At my Sagrada Nourish and Transform retreats, I teach a blend of yin and restorative. Some of the practices are fully restorative. And this idea of adaptive yoga, which I'm going to talk about a bit more, is adapting a practice to a physical limitation or an illness or your body in that moment. And so I actually believe that all yoga should be adaptive, though when we use the term adaptive yoga, it's usually in the context of inviting people who need specific adaptations, variations, or modifications for a certain physical condition. With these types of yoga, the timing is important. You need to spend enough time. They are not a hurried practice. And it's important to notice that both allowing enough time to slow down and doing them in an environment where you can slow down are key to having maximum positive impact. And so they're not usually the one that you do in your office at lunchtime, though that could work if you had a relaxing office space. You could do them outside on the grass, and or creating an environment where you can practice these poses in your bedroom that's luxurious, comfortable, calm is really a beautiful way to optimize your practice. And all of these practices, as I mentioned, of slow yoga are about the nervous system. And the goal is to upregulate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, which I talk about a lot, and downregulating your sympathomimetic fight or flight nervous system. And they are about conscious rest. And as I mentioned earlier, conscious rest is not sleep. It's literally different brainwaves than sleep. These types of yoga also often use sounds to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And those of you that have joined me at Sagrada more recently, we've started including sound healing in some of the restorative practices. We know that the vibrational frequencies in sound help support and heal our nervous system. And so this is another type of what I would restorative practice, the healing practice that can be very helpful. All of these types of practices are also deeply about breathing. And as most of our listeners know, breathing impacts your nervous system tremendously and also many other parts of your physiology. So I thought I'd start with gentle yoga. And gentle yoga is literally yoga where you feel gentle when you practice it. And so I would describe much of the yoga that I teach as gentle yoga, and that my yoga is not intended to be hard exercise yoga. And we actually know that this gentle yoga can have much more significant physiologic effects than the hot exercise type of yoga, and that the impacts can actually be much longer lasting. Adaptive yoga, as I mentioned, is a philosophy about adapting yoga to the body that you have and what works for your body. It's about doing what feels right in the moment and adding in modifications, adaptations, and variations that work for you. And I actually really like the idea of variations, because variations doesn't include any judgment of a practice being better or worse or more advanced or less advanced. There's just different variations of ways to practice tons of poses. And so inviting that language can feel better. Adaptive yoga, though, traditionally is described as yoga for those with disabilities in either their function or anatomy. So it's very much tailored to individuals and personalized. It's designed to be safe, comfortable, and practical for the body that you have. Adaptive yoga encourages you to start where you are. And the practice of adaptive yoga is going to be different for every person, depending on what adaptations their body needs. The philosophy of adaptive yoga is very much focused on the compassion and kindness. And that is true of all yoga, but bringing it in with non-judgment about what's possible for your body in this moment. If you had an amputation, if you have chronic arthritis, if you have, you're post-op and you're recovering, all of that would be considered adaptive yoga. And I would say gentle yoga as well, because you feel gentle and you move gently when you are practicing it. So what would not be gentle yoga would be a class that's focused on strengthening, for example. In adaptive yoga, we also use tons of props because they allow you to put your body in positions that might not otherwise be possible, safe, or comfortable for you. So chair yoga is actually a form of adaptive yoga, and yet some of us will use a chair to enhance our practice in other ways. So again, it's not a less than practice. It's not that, you have to do chair yoga because you can't do standing yoga. It actually allows you to do different things. And in fact, chair yoga is an adaptive way to bring yoga into an office where perhaps you don't want to have room for a mat or sit on the floor. And you can adapt many of the practices that I do in my classes to chairs. And this is also something that I have been known to bring into the Sagrada Retreat, so that you have practices that you can do in your office, and you have practices that you can do specifically to undo computer strain and neck and shoulder tension that most of us who work in medicine have. The other focus in adaptive yoga is once again on the breath. And the breath is about shifting the physiology. It's about being mindful, and it's about being aware. And I always say that the breath is always available to you. And it's available to you, unless you're in the ICU intubated, as a way to ground yourself, to come back into your body, and to find a pause and to be able to be present. Some of the other foci in adaptive yoga that I actually bring into all of my yoga, but is critically important in adaptive yoga, is focusing on the transitions. And the lesson that we can all learn from this is that when you mindfully enter and mindfully exit each pose, you don't hurt yourself. You learn more about your body, and you end up in the pose that you want to be in. And so this is true if you expand it to life as well, and is one of the things that I bring into Transition Well, which is my small group program for people who are transitioning. There are many overlays between philosophies in yoga and approaches of yoga to life, and especially transitions. The other intent in adaptive yoga and in all the yoga that I teach is the intention to feel better afterwards. And so you want to ensure that you don't do anything along the way that causes you problems. And so being kind to yourself, moving slow enough so you can listen. And when you listen, you may actually find things that you can address and shift. So restorative yoga is the yoga that is almost sleep. It is about embracing the power of conscious rest. It is completely different experience than most other styles of yoga. The postures are held almost effortlessly for long periods. And it's about slowing down, being in stillness, quieting the body, and opening your body through passive, gentle stretches. Many restorative yoga classes, you hardly move at all. At Sagrada, we usually do these in the evening, and I affectionately call it pajama yoga or pre-bed yoga. And it's actually a way of shifting your body into sleep and relaxation, and a way to improve sleep. And so I often suggest that physicians do restorative yoga after a shift to help them switch into sleep. And or if they're having trouble sleeping, you can do restorative yoga poses at night. And there are specific ones that seem to work better for different specialties and different times of day if you're needing to sleep at alternative times of day. The only work that's required on your part during restorative yoga is to pay attention to your breath and be aware of the sensations and feelings and thoughts that arise. The other piece that's part of your work is learning how to set yourself up safely and comfortably. So this practice of restorative yoga is just lovely, and I encourage everyone to try it. And you could go to a local class, and or you can figure out how to just do one pose. I have a couple of restorative yoga practices on my YouTube if anyone's interested in exploring them. The benefits of restorative yoga are really similar to the benefits of other styles of yoga. You have increased relaxation with deep breathing. There are plenty of studies that demonstrate that it is more effective in inducing relaxation than regular passive stretching. It improves sleep, and there are several studies, including a large meta-analysis in 2020, that showed that restorative yoga improves sleep quality. It also can increase melatonin and decrease hyperarousal. And there are many studies that show that yoga is related to improved well-being, and it improves your physical and mental well-being generally. It also improves mood and decreases pain, and it can strengthen the connective tissues around the bones and the joints, and so it can help you while you are healing from something else. So the last type of yoga that I wanted to address specifically is yin yoga. And yin is similar to restorative in that it's slow and gentle, but it's also different. It is what is traditionally known as nervous system yoga, and it is about stretching the fascia and the connective tissues. It involves breathing and movement, being very thoughtfully aligned, and it uses Chinese medicine meridians as a guide. So in yin yoga, we hold poses longer than in hatha, but shorter than in restorative yoga. So oftentimes 5 minutes or a certain number of breaths. It also very often uses less props than restorative, though not necessarily. I use blocks for most of my yin practices and a bolster, and I use the same for restorative. So it really depends on your love of props and how they feel to you. So yin yoga is something that we practice generally in the afternoons at Sagrada as a way of slowing down and coming back into your body. I often talk about slowing down enough to listen and to learn and to see what ails you, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast. So hopefully this delineation of the different types of yoga has been helpful to you. And I wanted to end with some reflection questions, as well as a few quotes about yoga. Do you want to learn to relax more? Do you want to be less stressed? Do you want to sleep better? Do you want to hurt less? Do you want to strengthen the connective tissues around your bones and joints? Do you want to learn to breathe strategically? All of these are available through gentle, restorative, slow yoga. Eckhart Tolle says, be at least as interested in what goes on inside you as what happens outside. If you get the inside right, the outside will fall into place. Restorative yoga and gentle yoga is about the inside. Frank Gellert Burgess says, our bodies are apt to be our autobiographies. And BKS Iyengar says, yoga teaches us to cure what needs not be endured and to endure what cannot be cured. And I love that quote because it gets us back into the philosophy of yoga, not just as a stretching or exercise. And I wanted to end with one of my favorite sayings, which is, what you practice grows. I encourage you to practice restorative yoga, practice stress reduction, practice relaxation, and practice restorative rest. So I hope that this podcast will serve as more than a gentle nudge to develop a practice of restorative and gentle yin yoga, and also to join me at an in-person retreat to learn these practices. They can really change your life. I invite you also to stay on after the singing bowl for some sound healing, something that I have been adding to restorative yoga at the retreats, and enjoy the vibrational frequencies and the way that your nervous system feels when you listen. Thank you all so much for listening. Please leave us stars and written reviews if you enjoy the podcast. All the important links are in the show notes, and I will see you next week.
As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or uplevel your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely.
Welcome to today's mindful moment. Today's mindful moment is going to be a special and different one. We are going to explore sound healing. Sound is a way of inviting relaxation, and it's a way of practicing restorative yoga. And in fact, it's something that, when done in person, can be a full body restorative healing experience. And so I invite you to stop what you're doing, pause, and come into stillness. Notice the soles of your feet on the earth, your sit bones on the chair, wherever you might be. And allow yourself to come back into your body, mind, spirit, and body, all in the same space. Coming back to your breath, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, with an exhale longer than the inhale. Breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. One more deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And I invite you to bring hand to heart, hand on heart, or one hand to heart, one hand to belly, noticing which one feels best to you, most connected, most calm, and most still. And now close your eyes, shutting out other external stimuli, coming into stillness, and taking a few moments here just to listen. Coming back to your breath and taking a moment to notice how you feel. Notice your chest and belly rise and fall with each inhale and exhale. And slowly open your eyes and bring your hands back into your lap. And once again, just notice. Notice how you feel. Hopefully you feel good. We'll see you next week. Have a beautiful week.